I was trained three things. One is to ensure that the organization you're building is profitable, is sustainable, and is scalable. These, according to me, are the three pillars of building a successful organization and leading it. In my earlier days, I wasn't very excited about money. But then I remember I had an Irish boss, and he sat me down one day and he said, Mala, you need to learn, you need to respect money, because it's only if you have money that you can be creative. You cannot be creative without money.
Welcome to Inspire Someone Today podcast, a show where we dive into the stories and insights that has the power to create ripples of inspiration in your life. I'm your host Shrikant, and I'm thrilled to be with you on this journey of inspiration. Hey my dear listeners, welcome back to yet another episode of Inspire Someone Today. The way I want to introduce our guest for today is she's vivacious, full of life, somebody who demonstrates tenacity and grit, and above all, a great role model for many folks, particularly the young, career-seeking professionals out there. It's an absolute joy and pleasure to have Malavika Harita on this episode of Inspire Someone Today. Malavika, great to have you on this show.
Thank you, Shrikant. Thank you for the very flattering introduction. As we were talking about, I think if we can inspire one single person, I think that makes such a difference to life. So thank you for having me on this show.
Thank you. This show is all about creating ripples of inspiration. And if even one of you are inspired by this conversation, Malavika and I would sign off on a happy note. On that note, Malavika, if I were to ask you about your 4 decades of experience, yes, I'm talking it in the past, but you're still going strong with 40 plus years of experience. You started your career in the field of advertising. How did this love for advertising begin?
42 years to be precise, Shrikant, since I graduated from IIM Bangalore. And advertising has been there for a much longer time than that, I think close to 100 years. But it is not a traditional profession in that sense for women. In my time, now that's not so anymore. But what was very interesting was the way I got into advertising. I actually fell in love with the subject, advertising and marketing, in my second year at IIM Bangalore. And I never fell out of love with it. I'm still in love with it over so many years, which is why I call myself a communication and brand evangelist. The reason being that you learn something new every day. You're working with a whole plethora of brands. I worked with many brands in my career. And every day is a new day. And it is such a fascinating mixture, of consumer behavior, of marketing, of statistics, analysis, consumer insights, and creativity, that I just stayed in love with it all my life. And what was very good for me, Shrikant, was that I got a job that I loved, and it melded so beautifully with my life. So I never had issues about work-life balance. The other thing I'd like to add is when I started my career so many years ago, there were no concessions to women, right? We had to compete because we were good at what we did. We were the best for the job. So there were no concessions for women at that point in time, and you're just thrown into the deep end and you have to learn to swim. And I must say, I've had a lovely time swimming. It's been tough, but I think it's worthwhile. Every minute, I never regret even a minute of my career in advertising.
So looking back, what has changed in the field of advertising 40 years on? When you started off to what it is today, what do you see as a big change?
We grew up in an era of traditional media, print, cinema, radio, and then television. And we did not have access to the kind of data and insights and analytics that people have today. So I think that's been a very big change because a lot of what we did was based on experience, was based on really solid market research, and was based on strong insights and taking that creative leap. I think in today's world, a lot of creativity is driven by data and data insights. And I'm not very sure that that doesn't sort of restrict human creativity. It's also becoming very transactional. We used to build brands which lasted for years and years and years. Nowadays, brands get built overnight. They die overnight. And, everything is very transactional. And the whole concept of building brands, having conversations with your customers, that is kind of diminished. The other big change that I see in my tenure is we grew up with some of the best minds in both advertising and in marketing, right? So it was a pleasure to go to a client's office for a meeting, but you came back always with something new. And the people on our side of the table were equally qualified and interested and creative. So it was a great mixture, melding of minds, shall we say. And with that came out brilliant ideas. I think that part has got lost today because it's become very, very transactional, as I said before, and completely data-driven. So that's what I think has been the biggest change in the whole scenario. Now, I'm not saying traditional media is good or bad and digital isn't. We have to evolve with the times. But the kind of
it's a sign of
communication...
changing times.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to accept that.
Yeah. And you make a very pertinent point here, melding of minds. In a long career like this, I'm sure you would have come across dozens of mentors or role models in your career. If you were to share some of the lessons that you have learned along the way, what would that be?
Let's just break this down into 2 or 3 parts. I started my career in HMT watches. You remember Timekeepers to the nation? Very few people remember a brand. It was one of the most wonderful brands in the country. Unfortunately, it declined and we gave way to Titan, probably because of wrong decisions. But those 6.5 years when I went into HMT straight from business school, I actually learned so much about how advertising works in practice. I remember we used to work with sisters, Bobby Sister being a great figure, Eliaba Thomas, Arijit Ghosh, and with JWT, I used to work with Ganesh Ishwar. And all of them were such brilliant people. And it was such a pleasure to work with them. Later, when I joined the client side, when I joined Sisters, I had the pleasure of working with equally intelligent minds. And two of my most favorite mentors, one is V. Shantakumar, who was our MD, and Shubhabrata Ghosh, or SG as he's called, who was our COO. And the two gentlemen never went easy on me, right? They always expected much more than you gave at that point, and they kept pushing you to the boundaries. But I'm glad they did, because that's how I learned to think. And I think the greatest gift that both of them gave me, especially SG, was the ability to think and conceptualize and look outside the box. And I think that's what's been so useful to me, both during my own career in advertising and now that I'm teaching and mentoring. I think it's really been useful to me. I've got the facility, or they've taught me how to think conceptually. And I think that's very important.
I think that's a great point for all of our young listeners listening to this. If you think your boss is so unrealistic pushing you, time and time again, when I've had guests on the show, in hindsight, they felt that was the best thing that could have happened to them. And here is yet another pertinent point that Malavika is making, that those nudges, those stretch assignments that the bosses gave is what, or in some shape or form, is what it has made the professional that Malavika is. Is it a fair summary of sorts, Malavika?
It could be very infuriating. I understand what a lot of your young listeners go through every day. It can be very irritating, very infuriating. But I think in hindsight, yes, you're right. When you look back, I think they always seem much rosier. But at that point, yes, you're very angry. But one of the things I learned was to convert that anger into positive energy. Look into myself and see how I could. So when you got over your initial irritation, I used to look back and say, hey, these guys make a point. Was what they said right? And invariably I found, except well, sometimes I didn't, but most times I found that the points they made were not wrong. And I think by just accepting that, I really improved the work that I had presented. When we're talking on this, Shrikant, I just want to add something. We didn't have the kind of delegation, I call it extreme delegation, that we have today in corporates, right? The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And everything is so compartmentalized. The agency and the organizations I grew up in, we were all encouraged to have a much broader view of the organization. So I have done everything from actually taking material to the courier at 2 a.m, to writing copy sometimes, to getting things back, to going presenting to client. So we were encouraged to do everything, right? And I think that's what's really actually extremely useful. And this is a bit of advice to all your young listeners. Get out of the box that organizations put you in. Don't get compartmentalized. Because if you do that, you get mentally compartmentalized. And that is a problem because then you just, you're like a horse with blinkers on. You follow one path. The moment you remove those blinkers, you see a much wider world and learn how to do other things. Observe, go and meet your customers, spend half a day in the market every week. And that's how you actually broaden your perspective. What is happening if you are in production? There's nothing to prevent you learning about marketing and the consumer, right? So that is one of the greatest things about advertising. It gave you a very wide perspective and you were encouraged to actually learn much more than whatever your designation said. So even if you're account director, you actually had to know about creativity, you had to know about production, you had to know about everything. And I think that is one of the things I would love all of you to do. Look around you and learn as much as you can. Get a broad perspective.
You get a broad perspective. Touching on that, want to hear from you circles of influence and how to go about building it.
They technically call it networking. Right? That's the favorite buzzword and piece of jargon that everyone uses. But building circles of influence is much more than that, right? So there is a very strong emotional bond. There is a layer of knowledge. There is a layer of emotion. There's a layer of friendship. And through this process, it's like, throwing a stone in the water. You keep seeing ripples going. And I believe that even building brands, not just humans, is about building these circles of influence, right? Which stem from the person at the center. Now, to be the centrum of a circle of influence, you need to bring something to the table. So it could be your subject matter expertise. It could be the fact that you're just a good human being. It could be the fact that you're very helpful. It could be the fact that, you are the sort of go-to person. I know a lot of people who are not spectacular, but who are the go-to people whenever there was an issue in our organization or whenever you have a personal issue. You have these go-to people who are always there for you, reliable, discreet, and they give you good advice. So circle of influence is slightly different from networking. And through my career, this is something that I did, not really initially consciously, but then I realized that it made me a richer person. And I'm sorry, I sound like a carnivore here, but I actually collected wonderful people around me. And the more people I had around me, the richer my life became, And I believe that is what is the circle of influence, having these conversations, just picking up the phone one day and saying hello, right? If a person needs help, going out of your way to do that, giving people advice if they want to, listening when they need to, And it's much more than networking. Networking is becoming very transactional. You rush around with your QR code or a visiting card. I don't think that actually builds influence in the long term.
It's more about giving. It's of being valued to the other person, isn't it?
It's also about not discriminating by designation, by position, right? By whether people dress smartly or speak good English, their qualification. It's just about connecting with people. I always believed in this peer-to-peer communication. In fact, in every organization that I worked with and I worked for, the people I was closest to, strangely enough, were the support staff, And you're sitting in the waiting room waiting for a meeting. It was so interesting to just talk to the receptionist or the security guard or the accounts person. For nothing. I wouldn't get anything out of the transaction. It's just about talking, learning, understanding, and it gave you a very good feeling.
So this segues into a nice conversation on the next topic that I would want to converse with you, which is about leadership. You have been at the helm of leadership at various places, and more so as the first CEO of Saatchi and Saatchi Focus in India. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
I was CEO of Saatchi and Saatchi Focus, which was a specialized agency that I set up to handle in those days direct marketing, and then it morphed into a B2B agency, and then I added on a healthcare agency. So clients who needed specialized inputs, which a B2C, typical B2C agency in those days, which are mass media oriented, couldn't handle, were the clients that my division would look after. Saatchi was very good to me that way. I am basically what is called an entrepreneur. I have an entrepreneurial mindset, which is why I teach entrepreneurship today. But I did need a corporate job because of my personal circumstances. And Saatchi allowed me to be an entrepreneur. So when I built these organizations, you didn't get anything for nothing. You didn't even get investment, right? And I always believed that organizations need to be sustainable. So I always built, even when I built Saatchi in Bangalore, Saatchi in Bangalore, I always made it profitable first before I diversified into another organization. So as leaders, I was trained 3 things. One is to ensure that the organization you're building is profitable, is sustainable, and is scalable. These, according to me, are the 3 pillars of building a successful organization and leading it. In my earlier days, I wasn't very excited about money. But then I remember I had an Irish boss, and he sat me down one day and he said, Mala, you need to learn, you need to respect money, because it's only if you have money that you can be creative. You cannot be creative without money. So understand money, figure out how you're going to make it, meet your numbers, and then you can do all the amazing creative work that you want to do. And I did exactly that. And I realized that it made a lot of sense. So one is understanding money. I think that's very important for leadership. Understanding people, big and small. Delegating probably activity, but not responsibility. The buck always stopped with me, and I never threw people under the bus. Having to take hard decisions sometimes and learning to say no. In fact, Shrikant, after this, I will send you a little visual that I've created, which talks about my learnings from leadership, right? So it's all about being human, being humane, and being tough, being able to say no, and understanding that leadership is slightly lonely. You're not a politician. You may not be popular, and you cannot be popular because everyone will not love the decisions that you make, but you still need to make them for the greater good. So it's a tough one. It's very tough being a leader, very lonely, because of very few people you could talk to. But at the same time, it's one of the most exciting places to be in, because you are seeing a vision in front and you're leading your team to that vision.
What would you do if you were to do it all over again?
Nothing. And I'm not saying that for effect. I actually loved my career. I loved my job. I loved what I did. And I wouldn't change a minute of it. Sometimes I may change clients. Clients were a little painful at times. But then I realized that they have their own, pressures. And what I did was I actually became something, it's in today's jargon, it's called the trusted advisor. And I became a trusted advisor to most of my clients, which is why they stayed with me for years and years. Because I would see a lot of stuff from their perspective rather than from a money-making perspective of an agency, right? So I was able to see it from both sides. So I wasn't very popular with my team sometimes, but I was I built myself into a trusted advisor, and that is something which has stood me in good stead. Would I change anything? No, I don't think so. And I kept my interests alive right through my career. I kept my teaching alive because very important for you to have a different interest. The only regret, perhaps, was that I gave up my classical dancing and music because I couldn't handle it. I was going through some personal issues and I had my career. So that is the only thing, if I regret anything, was giving up my Carnatic music and my Bharatanatyam. I was a classical performing artist and musician. I gave up both. So that's my only regret. Now I'm too creaky and old to resume my dancing, though I wish I could. But other than that, I really don't have regrets. And I'm one person who doesn't look back, Shrikant. I believe that if you keep looking over your shoulder, you bang your face against the door in front. So I always look ahead. There's no point. You do make mistakes as you go along, but there's no point sitting and brooding over them.
What a fantastic attitude to have. And along the way, you have coined a framework, ROI. What's Malavika's ROI framework?
Right. I keep propagating this. I love formulae, probably because I was a science major. But my ROI is return of investment on your time, which is the obvious one. Return of investment on your spend, but spending in terms of time and perhaps money. But I think it's much deeper than that. I think for young executives today, you make yourself obsolete immediately because of technology, because of the numbers of people coming out of schools, right? You become redundant almost immediately. Now, to give yourself ROI, which stands in my language for relevance, originality, and impact, you need to be constantly improving yourself. I believe in a continuous movement, a continuous improvement process, right? A SIP, if you want to call it that. And if you don't do that, if you don't keep yourself relevant, you don't keep yourself up to date, life passes you very, very quickly. Now, this is not just professionally, but it is also in terms of your personal life, right? How do you keep up with your kids? How do you keep up with your kids who are digital natives? They're born digital, right? How do you keep up with them if you don't know how technology works? How can you have a conversation with your son on football if you don't know anything about it and you shut your eyes to it? How can you comment on a world which is so different from the world you grew up in? And you can't expect a child to say, okay, you didn't have video games to watch. Now we do. You can see everything on video, so you don't have to read. So you need to be constantly aware of what's going on around you and keeping yourself up to date in terms of skills. I'm very happy to say that a lot of companies are spending money on upskilling and helping people to improve their skills. But there are a lot of people who are actually paying from their pockets to do MBAs, right? Who are now coming back to business school to do an MBA. I find that very, very heartening. They're eager to learn. The originality comes from your ability to conceptualize, to think outside the box, to think differently. And the impact is what is the objective of doing this? Because in today's world, we're always looking at what are the results, right? So it's good to be it's good to be just think for thinking's sake, which is also a good thing, but think for a purpose. And I have another formula which I want to share with you, which is P cubed. You need purpose and you need a plan. So I may want to become president of India, but, and I may be very passionate about it, but I don't have a purpose and a plan. There is no way that I'm going to get there. So you need to actually combine the thinking with the doing. And that's always been my strength, Shrikant. I'm able to think conceptually, but I'm also an excellent doer. And I don't think it's, degrading. And this is a little bit of advice to give to our listeners. Strategy is great, but strategy plus execution, plus understanding data and numbers is going to be the future of managers in the corporate world. Raja Rajamanar calls it quantum marketing. And I think there's a point there. Combining all of these, the strategy, the execution, the analytical skill is what will make the managers of the future.
That's a good framework for the manager of the future. If you were to give an example around ROI framework, what would it be?
Okay. So suppose you're working in the communication department, right? So suppose you're working in the marketing department. You need to understand brand, the relevance of a brand, building these circles of influence. You need to understand what actually happens in the marketplace, which means you need to know your consumer deeply, right? You need to understand how technology is actually changing all these equations. So that's the relevance part. How do you think out of the box? How do you develop? I'm talking about marketing still. How do you find out what are real consumer insights? How do you meet consumers and do qualitative research? Just have conversations to understand insights, deep insights in their mind around which you can build original campaigns. And before you do any campaign, have a before after. Start with your objectives very clearly and always measure against that objective. Always measure your results against that objective so you can take mid-course corrections when required. So this is just an example of how you would use ROI when you, as a marketing manager, are developing a campaign or developing a piece of whatever you're doing for the company.
I like how you have broken that piece. Malavika, at the beginning of the conversation, I did allude to the fact of resilience being associated with you. And not long ago, you faced with a significant personal challenge with your cancer diagnosis. Can you take us through the moment you received the diagnosis and your initial response to it? How was this life-altering situation made you the person that you are today?
Actually, Shrikant, I don't like pity, and I'm not asking for pity at all. I never have in all my life. I've had many googlies bowled at me. I've been earning since I was 19, and my father passed away in an accident. So my life has been a series of, we talked about this, serendipitous moments, which was sudden, and which you had to deal with. So one of them was my cancer. I remember I had just nursed my mother through 7 years of age-related dementia, and she passed away on the 22nd, I think, 3rd of March. I hadn't gone I'm very particular about my health checkups every year, and this is a bit of advice for everybody in the audience. Please don't neglect your health, right? So I used to go for my health checkup every year. Also, because I'm the mother of a doctor, I had to do it, otherwise my son would rip me up. So I said, okay, I didn't do it in November like I normally do. And then my mother passed away, and I was just thinking, let me push it to next November because I was not in a very happy state of mind. But my son somehow told me, he says, Amma, you haven't gone for your checkup, you better go. And I think this is where God kind of looks after me. I'm not a very religious person in that sense, but I believe I am a spiritual person. I believe in a God. And I just went for my regular checkup. And you're not going to believe this, but they found a tumor in my left breast, right? A very tiny tumor deep inside, which wouldn't have been seen normally. I couldn't feel it, but they saw it in the scan. And then they decided that they had to operate on it. So I came back that day with a bit of a shock. It hadn't quite sunk in. I came back from the lab, called my son, and he came home, and we just had a chat. So I felt very sorry for myself for 2 days. And I said, what the heck? I've just lost my mom, and now this is not fair. And, you go through all those processes of anger. But 2 days later, I realized that if I collapsed and I just, kept feeling sorry for myself, it's also because of my army upbringing. I've not been trained to feel sorry for myself. So I picked myself up and I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to impact all the people in Sachi who work for me, and I'm going to impact my entire family, because I am the sort of strong person in the family. I said, this is not on. My son is still studying and I can't kind of collapse like this. So I took 2 days to feel sorry for myself, and then I snapped back. It takes a lot of doing, right? And I said, okay, what's worrying me really? I realized it wasn't about dying. I've never been frightened of death. I don't, because I believe that you're going into a place you don't know anything about. What's there to be frightened about? All right. So I'm not frightened of death. But I realized what was holding me back was the fact that I had to make all the arrangements for my son. I wanted him to be comfortable. So I sat down and I did very practical things like, figured out all my bank balances, got everything put in joint, made all my lists, everything. I did everything that was required. And I said, okay, if I go tomorrow, it's just fine because my son's looked after, right? So that was the biggest fear which I removed. And then I went into hospital with a very positive mind. I said, fine, I'm going to hit me with all the treatment. I was still young then. So I was, I think, about 50-ish. So you could give me all the treatment you wanted. The other thing I did, which was very important, is I didn't shop for a doctor. I asked around. I found this Dr. K.S. Gopinath of HCG. I liked him a lot, and he gave me a great sense of confidence, and I just stuck with him. And he and I had a deal. I told him, doctor, I want to know exactly what's going to happen, pain and all. Yeah. I don't want you to mince any words with me. Tell me what I'm going to go through. And if you do that, then I won't Google you. If you do, then I Google. If you don't tell me, then I'm going to Google you and figure it out. Right? So if you tell me exactly what's going to happen, I'm not going to Google you, and I'll just follow what you say. The other thing I did, Shrikant, which actually helped me a lot, which was my project management skills. Can you believe that I used my project management skills to build my cancer treatment? And I managed my own cancer treatment because, frankly, it wasn't such a brave thing to do. It kept me occupied, checking checking schedules, going for my chemo, all of that. Of course, my son was there. And I kept a nurse who helped me through it, because I realized you need a professional person. You're not in your best frame of mind, so you can't keep shouting and screaming at family. And I was, fortunate enough to be able to afford a nurse. So we managed my cancer. My chauffeur, who's been with me for 30 odd years, my nurse and I would get into the car at 5 a.m. and go off for my radiation or chemo, whatever it was. My son would follow, much he was at hospital a lot of the time. We managed it. And I'm very proud of that. I took 2 days off when I was in the ICU. The rest of the time I worked, because I had my job that I was working with Sachi. And I told Sachi, this is going to happen, but I'm going to work from my hospital bed. We didn't have WFH those days. We had worked from hospital bed. I actually put on my earplugs, kept my laptop on my tummy, and did all my work. Just 2 days off. And I managed my 11 months of treatment. And I think that's what made me realize you can. And now I help a lot of people with cancer to face it. You have to face it finally, right? Face your demons.
Face your demons. What a powerful approach. You are a brave heart, I must say, Malavika.
My father was in the army, and we always used to joke that my mother was the general, because we were allowed to be sorry for ourselves for about 2 minutes. And we were given a spanking on our backsides and get back to work.
Practice tough love. Even in your diagnosis, I noticed something. You implemented your P3 formula, prepare and plan, even going through something as scary and as life-threatening as cancer care.
Absolutely. You have to. If you don't plan, that's the problem. One is fear. The biggest problem with any disease, especially cancer, is fear. And fear is a very strange thing. The more you think about it, the more frightened you get. If you face it and say, okay, it's going to pay. All right, so what? Let me handle it. All that you need to do is breathe deeply. That's it. The more you think about it and imagine fear, the worse it becomes. If you face it, it isn't so bad, believe me. It's not pleasant. I'm not saying it's pleasant, but it is easy. One of the biggest problems, and this is something I'm sharing with everybody, if you have women in your family, either wives or sisters or mothers or grandmothers, please ensure that after the age of 40, because the age of cancer has come down dramatically, after the age of 40, every woman needs to have a mammogram and a scan every year, right? Because cancer is easily detectable, particularly breast and uterine, and you can get rid of it, right? So you can cure it. It's eminently curable, but you need to catch it quickly. So a medical checkup every year, including a mammo, is very important. The other thing people feel very bad about is losing your hair. And that's quite frightening for a woman. Suddenly your hair comes off. But look at me. My head came off, so I shaved it off. I had a lovely round head. I'd never seen my head before. It looked like Ronaldo's football, perfectly round. I've never seen my hair because all is covered. And then my hair grew back. I shaved it again, and look at me now. All the men I know are very envious of my hair because I have to cut it twice a month, and all of them are going bald. So cancer does bring its own positive, does it not?
Talk about giving a positive spin to it. You remind me of this Japanese concept called Ikigai. As life has thrown lemons at you, you have made sure that you turn it out into lemonades. So how was this journey unfolding? This whole concept of Ikigai, was it consciously done? It happened along the way? Would be intriguing to hear from you. How did you shape some of these challenges into what it turned out to be? Like you say, conscious serendipity.
The lemon and the lemonades are true because I've had many such occasions, and I managed those well. But when I actually began to think about Ikigai, when I decided to retire from Saatchi, I had another couple of years, but I said enough of corporate life, 25 years. I said, let me do something else. And that's when I worked 2 weeks on Ikigai and liked it. It was so simple. And like everything Japanese, so elegant. It's such an elegant model. So I spent a couple of weeks thinking about it. Money has never been my driver, though I don't want to be poor, but money has never been my big driver. I need to be comfortable. That's it. But I realized that what would give me happiness going forward was the sharing of my knowledge and experience, right? And I built my whole Ikigai around that, of sharing knowledge and experience. I'd been teaching for 30 years before that, but I decided, let me teach. So that's when my second career of teaching and mentoring and all the things I do today, training and consulting, have grown, because it's all about sharing my knowledge and experience, whatever it is, as little as it is. And I think that's given me the greatest joy. And I'm thinking, what shall I do next? I'm just debating my third career. Because why should only the 20-year-olds have all the fun? Why can't the lady who's 66 look at a third career? And I'm seriously considering what to do next. Politics or God? God, woman, or politics? So when I figure it out, Shrikant will be the first to know.
Okay, after talking about Ikigai, here we are with the power of 3 round. Malavika, if you're ready, the first of the power of 3 round question to you. 3 individuals you would recommend to be hosted on this podcast.
Right. Sundar Madakshira, S. Ghosh, and Alina Alam.
We advised your older self, not younger, older self.
Exercise regularly. Yeah. Take some time out just to refresh your mind. And be a little more social and sociable. Don't immerse yourself so much in your work. Just meet people and do nothing about it. Just have fun sometimes.
It's about creating your circles of influence. The next one. In the pursuit of excellence, if Malavika were to recommend three micro experiments. What would those three micro experiments be?
Learn, explore, and experiment. Experiment as an expert. Don't stand on the shore and keep talking and theorizing. Jump into the water and learn to swim. You may fail, which is great, because I always believe, and this is my strong premise, that I have learned much more from my failure than I have from my success. Success is 2 minutes on social media. Failure is actually what teaches you what life is all about and how to improve.
From the personal branding expert, 3 tips for personal branding.
Authenticity, consistency, and good communication. And I think authenticity is the most important. I was on a panel the other day, and all of us agreed that personal brands come from inside, from you, the inner you. So the authenticity is very, very important. And you have to be consistent when you build a brand, just like a physical brand. And you need to learn to communicate properly. I see a lot of stuff on social media, including LinkedIn, which makes no sense. It's obviously been written with a ChatGPT assist. It doesn't show who you are as a human being. And even if you use ChatGPT, which it's very useful, always layer you onto it. So it's like a sponge cake, which you need to authenticate, and then add your layer onto it, if that's the way it is. But don't make it standard. It's becoming so standard nowadays. The other thing about personal branding, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you a fourth point, is to have a point of view. You need to have a point of view. Otherwise, it becomes very bland and boring. Becomes like chicken soup, right? Very bland.
3 book recommendations, Malavika.
One of my all-time favorites is a book called To Kill a Mockingbird. The other book that I've read in recent times, which actually made me think a lot, is the one on quantum marketing by Raja Rajamanar. And Marketing 5.0 by Kotler, with all his co-authors, has also they've thought very deeply about this interface between technology and marketing and how technology is actually changing consumer behavior. So these are 3 books which I find very, very interesting and which are very useful, actually. There are a lot of other books which keep coming up. They come up and they die very soon. But there was another 2 books which I found very interesting. Yuval Noah Harari. He has written about the Homo sapiens, right? The history of mankind. Those 2 books, his books have been created into illustrated graphic novels. Really thick ones. Beautifully done. Really beautifully done. And I know a lot of people don't like to read thick, heavy tomes. It's a very nice way of understanding the history of mankind. I found those very, very interesting. And another book I picked up, sorry to giving you many more than you asked for, is about Bangalore. Since you are from Bangalore and so am I, it is a book by Paul Fernandez, who talks about from Kempegowda to COVID. And he talks about the history of Bangalore, again graphically, but very nicely written, beautifully illustrated. Paul Fernandez follows Mario Miranda's style. And that was another book which is very dear to me. I got it autographed by him and I'm keeping it very safe.
This would be an interesting one. The last of the Power of 3 round, Malavika. Since you work so closely with a lot of entrepreneurs, 3 entrepreneurs to look out for, or 3 entrepreneurial ideas that is out there in the horizon to look out for.
There is a huge amount of activity in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But one of the things I'm finding, I mentor about 50 to 60 enterprises a month, is the fact that you need to have what is called a value proposition. What is the value that you bring to your customer? How are you better than competition? And is this something that the customer wants? Is it a benefit that they are prepared to pay for? So your value proposition needs to be articulated. It is also the core of your business strategy. The other thing I tell my entrepreneurs is please go out into the marketplace, meet a minimum of 100 customers and talk to them face to face to understand whether they really want your product. You can't build products sitting at home or in a lab. You need to actually go out there and figure out whether it makes sense to the customer. The third thing is my famous P-Cube formula again. All the entrepreneurs I know have a lot of passion, but you need a purpose and a plan to be able to achieve that passion or to be able to actualize that idea. It's not a journey for the faint-hearted, believe me. You need to be a really tough, resilient person to be able to cope with the entrepreneurial journey. I'm doing a series of small videos, nothing very deep, but talking about the alphabet of entrepreneurship, the A to Z of entrepreneurship. I'll be putting it up on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Insta. And I'm sort of articulating the various qualities that an entrepreneur needs. I might think at H or I today. So please do follow that.
We'll make sure that we'll put it in the show notes. That brings us to the end of Power of 3 round. As we check along, before we call it as wrap, question for you, Malavika, is apart from the legacy that you have created so far, what's the legacy that you would want to leave behind? What is that you would want to be remembered for, both in your professional world as well as in your personal world?
My ability to have influenced the people that I either teach or mentor or meet in a positive way. If I've made people feel more positive about their lives and not depressed about it, if I've helped people to look ahead, right, and be positive about their lives and see the little good things, serendipity, understand that concept of serendipity, I think I would have achieved something. But my best production in life, and the production that I'm really happy about, proud about, is my son. He has grown into an amazing human being with a desire to serve. His doctor, as I mentioned earlier, the desire to serve people. And I think that's my greatest contribution, that I've given a doctor to the world who is not into this for money, who's into it to actually serve. So if I've touched people's lives and leave them, they think of me with a smile, I think I would have done my job. Or he'll be angry with me for having talked about it. Both could happen.
Malavika, as we always do, I ask my guests at the end of this show, as this show is all about creating ripples of inspiration, what's your Inspire Someone Today message to all of our listeners out there?
As I said earlier, keep learning. Never, ever stop learning. The day you do that, you are dead. Not physically, but mentally. I've always believed that knowledge, and this is probably the last thing I'm going to say, knowledge is actually power.
Knowledge is power. On that note, Malavika, thank you for this authentic, from the heart conversation. Wishing you continued success, health, and peace.
Thank you. Thank you, Shrikant.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Inspire Someone Today. This is Shrikant, your host, signing off. Until next time, continue to carry the ripples of inspiration. Stay inspired, keep spreading the light.